Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking an annual phenomenon that impacts literally millions of people, yet it's so often completely misunderstood. We're talking about the Assam floods. Okay, let's dive into this and look at the real data to understand what's actually happening on the ground.
Right off the bat, we need to look at the devastating physical reality of these floods, like we saw recently in the Associated Press coverage of the 2026 inundations. We aren't just talking about a few large puddles or swollen riverbanks here. We are talking about massive, landscape-altering displacement. We're seeing entire communities, roads, and agricultural lands just entirely swallowed by water, and it forces this massive, large-scale humanitarian response year after year.
So to make sense of all this, we've broken it down into 5 parts. First, the reality of the annual floods. Then, we'll look at the anatomy of the Brahmaputra River itself. After that, we'll unpack the actual recipe for this inundation, review our current defenses, and finally, try to chart a real path to resilience.
All right, Section 1, the annual Assam floods, and the deeper systemic reality behind them.
To truly grasp the sheer scale of this, we kind of have to look past the really simplistic narrative that, oh, it just rains a lot, right? Yes, heavy monsoon rainfall is definitely a factor, but treating this as just a weather event completely ignores the deeper systemic reality of the region. Just look at this quote from a local resident. They say, "As a resident of Assam, I have seen the flood situation in Assam since childhood. At times, flood sometimes enters parts of cities and towns too. This isn't some freak once-in-a-century disaster. For the millions living in this valley, this is a pervasive, lifelong reality. It dictates their housing, their agriculture, basically their entire way of life."
And this massive displacement affects way more than just human settlements. We're talking incredible wildlife too, like these elephants having to wade through incredibly deep water just to survive. Iconic regions like Kaziranga National Park are completely transformed. And seeing that really sets the stage for understanding just how unique, and honestly, how vulnerable this specific environment really is.
Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of the Brahmaputra, a truly dynamic natural force.
Now, what's really interesting about this map is the absolute sheer scale of the catchment area. The Brahmaputra doesn't just collect water from Assam, it's receiving this massive runoff from a gigantic mountainous basin covering Tibet, Bhutan, Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, and Meghalaya. And by the way, Meghalaya is home to some of the literal wettest places on Earth. All of that immense volume is draining directly into this one specific valley, and it happens in a very, very short period of time. To put that into perspective, the river is about 2,900 kilometers long. As it travels that enormous distance, it's building up one of the highest river discharges and one of the heaviest sediment loads of any major river on the entire planet, all before it finally enters the flat expanse of Assam.
Let's get into Section 3, a recipe for inundation and the compounding multipliers.
So, we have this massive, ridiculously powerful river, but why does it spill over so violently every single year? Well, first off, the Brahmaputra doesn't act alone. It receives water from more than 50 major tributaries. We're talking rivers like the Subansiri, the Manas, the Giabarali, the Dhansiri, the Kupali, and the Beki. When the intense southwest monsoon and those massive local thunderstorms hit, it's not just the main river cresting. Many of these 50-plus tributaries are flooding simultaneously. It creates this absolutely devastating compound flooding effect across the whole valley. And this brilliantly illustrates the geological dilemma we're dealing with. Upstream, you've got the steep, geologically young, and highly erosion-prone Himalayas. The heavy rains trigger landslides and rockfalls, dumping just enormous quantities of sand and silt into the water. Then, downstream, that exact same river suddenly enters the flat, wide, low-lying alluvial valley of Assam. When millions of tons of sediment suddenly settle into a totally flat plain, the riverbeds actually rise up, the channels get shallow, and all that rushing water basically has nowhere to go but right over the banks. But we also have to acknowledge the accelerators here. Human impact is real. Deforestation in the upstream catchments means water rushes down way faster than it used to. Encroaching on natural wetlands has basically destroyed the valley's natural sponges. And then you throw climate change into the mix, which is bringing more intense, erratic rainfall and faster glacial melt. Now, to be clear, these aren't the original causes of the floods. The region's geography takes care of that. But they are massive, human-driven multipliers that are making the crisis so much more intense.
Section 4, Current Defense Mechanisms. How are we protecting the population?
Given this overwhelming natural reality, how on earth are we fighting back? Well, for decades, the main strategy has pretty much been traditional flood control.
We use river gauge stations and satellite monitoring for early warning forecasting so we can get people to relief camps. To protect the land itself, we build embankments and use geobags to try and stop riverbank erosion. But here's the hard truth. Many of these embankments are decades old, and they frequently breach because, at the end of the day, they're attempting to constrain a river that is naturally designed to shift its course and spill over a flat floodplain. We're essentially trying to fight against the underlying geography of the region.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the path to resilience and integrated solutions. Because we literally can't change the geography, we're currently witnessing a crucial pivot in how experts approach this whole crisis. Let's move to this table and see how this builds a completely different framework. Under infrastructure, the outdated model was to just endlessly extend those old embankments. The modern approach? Building flood-resilient elevated roads, houses, and shelters. For ecosystems, instead of building on top of wetlands, we actively restore them so they can absorb floodwaters like a giant sponge. And for planning, we have got to stop localized reactive responses. The Brahmaputra spans multiple countries. Managing it properly requires basin-wide, transboundary cooperation and sharing hydrological data. It's a total mindset shift from a stop-the-water mentality to a manage-the-risk mentality.
Which leads us to the ultimate question, the one that gets asked every single monsoon season after millions of dollars are poured into these interventions. Can the floods in Assam be completely prevented?
The answer, bluntly, is no. They can't. Assam is quite literally a natural floodplain created by the Brahmaputra millions of years ago. Completely eliminating the floods is geographically impossible, and frankly, it's just entirely unrealistic.
So the crucial point is that we shouldn't actually want to stop them completely. I know that sounds crazy, but this is the massive paradigm shift we need to understand. These seasonal floods are the vital lifeblood for the local ecosystem. They sustain amazing places like Kaziranga National Park. When the river overflows, it deposits nutrient-rich silt that actually replenishes soil fertility for all the agriculture. It supports massive local fisheries, and it maintains the incredible biodiversity of the entire region. The ecosystem absolutely relies on this annual inundation just to survive.
The goal can no longer be this futile attempt to control nature. The goal has to be reducing the damage and preventing the tragic loss of human life through smart, resilient infrastructure and early warnings. We really have to ask ourselves, are we ready to stop fighting the river and finally learn to live with it? It's a fundamental shift in our relationship with the natural world, and honestly, it's the only sustainable path forward for Assam. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this helped you see the full story beyond just the rainfall.